Hello, welcome back to Mark's Garden UK. I'm Mark and this is our new tree fern. Yes, we've gone a little bit bonkers and we've bought another one. We've added to our existing collection of 7 tree ferns, which extends into the fernery garden at the rear of the cottage here. It's actually getting a little bit of an obsession and an addiction now, but there's a reason why we bought this one. We went to a lovely garden centre called Knowbridge down in Shropshire, and we got quite a good deal because this was last year's stock and it wasn't quite as perfect as the current year's stock. So David, who owns Knowbridge, gave us a really good price, and he knew there was nothing wrong with it, and we know there's nothing wrong with it. Anyway, getting to the point of this video. In this video, I'm going to show you how I plant these tree ferns. That's quite a big one. You can get some shorter ones and they're quite stable because it's quite tall and it's actually got a nice bend on it. It's not quite so stable, so I'm going to stake it. I found a really old piece of wood, quite gnarled and rotten with a little bit of woodworm in it, and I'm going to use that as a stake. Obviously I can't leave it leaning against these 2 chairs here, and I want the curve to be leaning in to the courtyard here, so that'll be one of the considerations. I'm not putting it right back against the wall because these things have a span at the top like an umbrella, and I want to enjoy that span. It'll be nice because it'll cast some shade on the exotic tropical border which is starting to grow behind it. So that's about approximately where the location is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to dig a hole using my post hole digger and then put this old piece of wood in at the back, and then I've got some natural looking jute rope which I'll use to tie it to this post. Hopefully this will be discreet and be hidden behind the tree fern and you won't see it. So that's the job for today, and whilst I'm doing that I'll share some of the things I know about tree ferns, and I'll also show you some of the tree ferns that we've had in this courtyard all winter, and you can see how they're growing. Some of them are growing, some of them are not growing, so you'll be able to compare that to your own tree ferns. I get quite a lot of messages about tree ferns. People worry about the crowns and worry about whether they've survived the winter or not. Well, they probably have, they're just taking the time to come out. Anyway, let's get on with the job. Let's start digging the hole at the back of this tree fern where I'm going to put this stake. Probably going to put about 1/3 of it in the ground. The remaining 2/3 will stick up vertical and I'll tie it to it. Right, let's get on with it. Now, despite the fact that it's quite a sunny day today, it's actually quite chilly. It's the 3rd of May and we've got quite a cold breeze. I've only just really unwrapped my tree ferns. I wrap them up for the winter, and there's a video on my channel about how to protect your tree ferns in the winter. Now, technically they are quite hardy and you really shouldn't need to protect them down to about -10 or -15. And I've had tree ferns in my garden covered in snow without any protection and they've survived. But because of the cost of tree ferns and how expensive they're getting, I do now take the precaution of protecting them for the winter, and that essentially involves putting some oak leaves in the crown very gently, wrapping the crown, which is this top bit, in some insulation, and then wrapping it in horticultural fleece, and then wrapping it in a coffee sack simply for aesthetics. And you can see that on my video. I'll put a link to those winter protection videos at the end of this one. Now, the fronds in the winter time, if they get caught by frost, will go brown, and they will actually be dead at that point. They're not going to come back, and therefore I remove them. But some people don't bother removing the fronds, they leave them on. But I think just for aesthetic purposes it's better to take them off, put them on the compost heap. Now, there is a debate about whether when you remove the fronds it causes the crown to close up, and if you have a closed crown, is it then therefore possible for it to grow out? Well, my experience is, and I bought one of these with a very, very tightly closed crown, if you keep that crown nice and moist and soft, the new croziers or fronds will have no problems pushing it out. Now, in terms of roots, Do tree ferns produce roots? Well, the answer to that is yes, they do. In fact, all this trunk is essentially a lot of dead roots and a lot of dead croziers. There's not much life on a tree fern this size between the crown and the ground. Most of that is kind of inert dead matter. But if you put the bottom of that on the ground, it will produce roots, even a big one like this. And that surprises me in a way, because where does the life suddenly spring from? At the bottom of that trunk, but it does. And if you don't believe me, there is a video on my channel, Do Tree Ferns Produce Roots? And in that video you can see the roots that they produce. However, my belief is really they're just for stability rather than for feeding the top. In terms of feeding, I always feed the top of this with liquid seaweed about once a week. You can put a couple of pellets of chicken food in there, you know, pelleted chicken manure, but not too much, because you don't need to overfeed it and you don't need to burn it. So really just a liquid feed once a week. In the summertime, don't let it dry out. Keep it wet. It loves the wet, and that's because of its native environment. It lives under the tree canopy in the forest and it stays damp all the year round. So whatever you do, don't let it dry out. It's also important really not to let it to dry out in the winter time. Apparently, I was told that more of these die from drying out in the winter time than they do from freezing. There's my post. Let's see how far we've got. Yeah, that's good. That's going to be deep enough to remain stable when I backfill it with this soil. So that's exactly what I'm going to do next. I'm going to backfill it with the soil, tamp it down a bit so that it's nice and stable. Then I'm going to play around with the position of this tree fern so that it's in the right position, got the lean in the right direction, and then I'm going to tie it up with a natural jute rope like this. Now I'm blessed with very sandy soil here, so digging a post hole like that has been quite an easy job. What's not making it easy is this tight position. I'm trying my best not to stand on this well-rotted manure here, because underneath here there's all kinds of exotic plants waiting to come up for the spring. You can see pink china here, and there's lots of other plants underneath there. If you subscribe, I'll be doing an update on this border as it springs into life. So here we go. Let's carefully try and get this backfilled with this sandy soil. Now I'm just going to take a few steps away to make sure that that's vertical. You can see a vertical line better from a distance, and then I'll get my lump hammer and I'll tamp that in. You can see here is a label off this tree fern. These are imported from Australia and Tasmania, and they all have to be certified. And so when you buy one of these, try and find, well, you must find one with one of these on. And of course all the stock at Knowbridge have got these on. We bought these from the Palm Tree Company, so that's another good company to have a look at, but they all come from the same place. When you're buying one, it's a good idea to see how heavy it is. If it's completely dried out, of course it'll be light, and you don't want to be buying one that's completely dried out. They come across the ocean over the winter time. They usually arrive in about February time, and they've usually been in a temperature controlled container all the winter on that long journey from places like Tasmania. So if something is completely dry, that might be an indication that it's been dehydrated, and if it's been dehydrated, it may not have any life in it. When you do get them, very often they look as if they've just been sliced off like a tree trunk. This one has got green fronds on it because it's last year's stock and it's been kept under cover all winter. But most of them, when you buy them, when they've just been imported, have no signs of any fronds or croziers. You mustn't be alarmed by that. So that's my stake in place. That's to give it some stability, because you'll see in a minute, you don't plant any of these into the ground. Well, you can if you want to, but at £70 a foot, if you put a foot of that into the earth, you're losing £70 worth of your trunk. So what I do is I just sit them on top of the ground and don't dig a hole for it at all. You'll see that in a minute, but for now, I need to move this out of the way. And this is the kind of position it's going to end up in, leaning over towards the dining set where we eat our suppers. in the summertime. Let's spend a few minutes having a look inside some of these crowns. This crown is looking incredibly healthy, I have to say. I'm delighted with that. That's going to be amazing when it completely unfurls. But now I'll show you some which don't look as good as that. But I'm not worried about them because I know they will end up like that in a couple of months' time. So here's the new one that I've just been talking about, and you can see inside here some beautiful, tightly packed croziers. I always think they look like gorilla's knuckles in the middle of there, but that's going to give us a wonderful display. I've got two more there. There's a very tall one that's about 7-8 foot tall, and another one behind it approximately the same height. Lovely curve on this one. Sometimes you pay more for the curve. We'll have a look at this one last, but there's one there, slightly more in the shelter of the courtyard, and you can see if I move the camera, and you'll have to excuse the wobbly camera, I'm afraid, because I'm handheld at the moment, and we'll just have a look inside that. But hopefully you can see there that we've got some lovely fronds. This has been sat here all winter. It was protected. It did go down to -10, and it's now coming back to life. But have a look at this small one here. This has been in a slightly more sheltered position, and I think it's doing correspondingly better, as you can see. We've got lots of hostas and arum lilies and shade loving plants here. Fatsia japonica there. But look at this one. If you're worried about yours and thinking it's looking dead, it might just be in this condition. It's not quite had the heat yet, but down in there is some green. That will come back to life. Let's move round. Still not going to look in that one yet. Let's look in this one. Again, tightly packed. Some black fronds there, can you see? Don't know if that will come back. But these here with this lovely pale brown fur on them, these are all about to unfurl. Don't panic, be patient. Let's go and have a look in the top of this one. It's not quite getting there, but bear in mind that this has been the most exposed. It's on the external edge of the courtyard and it has the wind. But you can see there's evidence of life. There's a little green frond coming through, and it will continue to grow, and by June, July we'll have a lovely canopy from that tree fern. Don't panic. So the message there very much is don't panic, be patient, keep it moist, especially as we go into warmer times, and it will reward you. Feed it once a week with liquid seaweed. Now this is the natural jute rope which I'm going to use to tie my tree fern to that stake. It's not ideal, you wouldn't want to see that, you certainly wouldn't see that in the wild, but it's the best solution I can come up with, and eventually that rope will go green, covered in sort of green mould like these, and it blends in much better. Now I've got the task now of trying to manoeuvre that from behind these two chairs towards that stake and tying it without it falling over. I'm going to get a long piece of this ready, so I'm going to wrap it round a couple of times because I like it to be double wrapped, and then I'll cut off some off. I'll put a link to that in the description box below this video off Amazon if you want to buy some. These are sharp haberdashery scissors. These are great for cutting this with. Well, that was straightforward enough and a little bit easier than I expected it to be. Just take the sold label off, that's also a certificate, and I'll tidy this rope up so that it looks a bit neater. I've got two nice straight lines around there. Now, that's relatively stable and secure. It's not put any roots down, it will do eventually, but if a strong wind caught the top of that, it could pivot around this axle here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put a few stakes in around the bottom here, just to secure the bottom, to stop the bottom from swerving from one side to another. So I'll do that on 3 sides, and then I'll use my mini chainsaw just to tidy them up, and then we can bury them in a bit of gravel. So just a stake here just at the bottom. So there you go, one large tree fern safely planted and staked for stability, because not much of it is buried in the ground. I decided not to cut the stakes in the end because I've covered them in gravel. They look quite discreet. Hope you've enjoyed it and found it informative. There are other tree fern videos on my channel if you go and look for them. If you want to see how all these tree ferns grow into the summer, hit the subscribe and notifications bell. If you've got any questions about tree ferns, put them in the comments box below this video. I'll try my best to answer them. And please, if you don't mind, have a look at the video at the end of this one, which is called Can You Help? That's all for now. See you soon.